Sitting in my luxury penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline, I take a sip of bourbon. I look out at the city I helped build. But just 3 weeks ago, my reality was entirely different. I lay on an gurney drenched in cold sweat, begging my mother to watch my young twins Zion and Zuri while my appendix ruptured. Her response to my medical emergency was to call me a nuisance and a burden. She had VIP tickets to see Taylor Swift and refused to miss the Eras tour for a stomachache. From my hospital bed, I quickly called a premium nanny service to rescue my young children. Then I opened my banking app and immediately cut off my ungrateful family's financial support. Before I tell you how their fake high society world came crashing down around them, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe right now if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members. Growing up in the affluent circles of Buckhead, Atlanta, appearances were everything. My parents, Desmond and Valerie, were absolutely obsessed with the concept of Black excellence and generational wealth. They spent decades carefully curating an image of elite success, attending galas, and judging anyone beneath them. I was always the black sheep. While my younger sister Chloe was their golden child, I disappointed them. I dropped out of law school to pursue what they mocked as a silly little hobby, making natural hair products. They never missed an opportunity to tell me how much I embarrassed the family name. What they did not know was that my hobby had evolved into a massive financial technology empire. My company was valued at tens of millions. I kept my wealth hidden because I knew exactly how greedy and entitled they were. Yet despite their disrespect, I still felt a sense of familial duty. For 3 years, I had been quietly paying the mortgage on their mansion through an anonymous corporate entity. I also paid for Chloe to lease luxury vehicles because her white husband, Brad, was completely broke. Brad came from old money that went bankrupt years ago, but he still paraded around Atlanta living off my hard-earned money. All of that silent generosity ended the moment my appendix ruptured. The pain hit me while driving home from a client meeting. I barely pulled into the hospital parking lot with Zion and Zuri crying in the back seat. The doctors rushed me inside and told me I needed surgery to prevent a fatal infection. In a state of absolute panic, I dialed my mother. I explained the severity of the situation and begged her to pick up the twins. Through the phone, I could hear loud music and clinking champagne glasses. My mother scoffed loudly into the receiver. She told me I was being incredibly selfish for trying to ruin their special night. She said Brad had pulled major strings to get them access to the VIP lounge at the stadium, and she was not about to leave early to babysit. She told me to hand my kids over to a neighbor or a nurse, because I was always trying to ruin her fun with my petty problems. Then the line went dead. She actually hung up on me while I was crying in agony. I lay there on the sterile hospital mattress, shivering from fever and heartbreak. The nurses began wheeling me down the hallway toward the operating theater. My phone vibrated against my leg. I managed to lift it with trembling fingers, expecting an apology or a message saying they were on their way. Instead, it was a text message from Chloe. She told me to stop stressing our mother out because my dramatic behavior was ruining their concert vibe. She told me to grow up and handle my own life for once. That text message was the exact moment the last remaining thread of my loyalty snapped. A profound, icy clarity washed over me, replacing the sharp physical pain in my abdomen. I realized that my family did not just take me for granted. They actively viewed my existence and my children as an inconvenience to their luxury lifestyle, a lifestyle that I was secretly funding. I had exactly 3 minutes before the anesthesiologist put me under. I used the first minute to dial the elite nanny service I kept on retainer. I ordered them to the hospital immediately to take Zion and Zuri to my penthouse. I used the second minute to kiss my crying children and assure them Mommy would be right back. I used the final minute to open my banking application. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was absolute. I navigated to the family accounts. I selected the primary and secondary credit lines that my parents and my sister used for their daily lavish expenses. With one firm tap on the screen, I froze every single card. Then I moved to the automated payments section. I canceled the monthly transfer that paid the mortgage on their mansion. I canceled the payments for Chloe and Brad and their expensive car leases. As the surgical lights glared above me and the doctor began counting backward from 10, I slowly felt the anesthesia slipping into my veins. I closed my eyes with a genuine smile on my face. I knew that in 30 minutes my mother was going to try to buy another round of overpriced champagne at that stadium bar. I knew Brad would try to show off all his fake wealth to his elite friends. And I knew exactly what the stadium credit card machine was going to say when they tried to swipe it. The golden trap was finally set, and the invoice for their cruelty was officially due. I had spent my entire life being treated like I was nothing, but tonight I was the one pulling all of the strings. Waking up from emergency surgery feels like swimming upward through a sea of dark, heavy mud. The first thing I registered was the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed. The second thing was the glaring white fluorescent light cutting into my vision. I blinked against the harshness, taking a shallow breath that sent a sharp spike of pain through my abdomen. I was alive. My appendix was gone, and I was completely alone in the recovery room. There were no balloons sitting on the visitor chair. There were no anxious parents waiting to hear if their daughter had survived a severe medical emergency. There was just a quiet, compassionate nurse checking my IV line. I asked her for my phone. She handed it to me with a sympathetic smile, probably assuming I was eager to update my worried family. The screen lit up with 32 missed notifications. Not a single one asked if I was alive. Not one asked if Zion and Zuri were safe. Instead, I opened Instagram and clicked on my sister Chloe's latest live video. The screen filled with the deafening roar of the stadium bass and flashing strobe lights. Chloe was screaming the lyrics to a pop song while pressing her face against her husband Brad. Brad was wearing a ridiculous vintage blazer he claimed was inherited from his grandfather. We all knew he bought it at a consignment shop because his supposedly wealthy bloodline had been broke for 2 generations. In the background, my mother Valerie was throwing her head back in forced laughter, holding up a massive bottle of imported champagne. My father Desmond stood next to her, attempting to look like the ultimate Atlanta patriarch. They looked so incredibly proud of the generational wealth image they were broadcasting to the world. The video had been posted exactly an hour after I was wheeled into the operating theater. They were drinking on my dime while a surgeon was slicing into my stomach. I closed the social media app and opened my secure financial portal. For 3 agonizingly long years, I had allowed my family to treat me like a lower-class citizen, while I quietly acted as their primary bank. They loved telling their country club friends that I was just a struggling decorator who needed to find a good man. They loved mocking my single mother status. But they never questioned where the money came from when my father claimed his real estate investments were paying off. It was time to finish the execution I started before the anesthesia took hold. I pulled up the Buckhead property account. The account showed a recurring transfer of $15,000 scheduled for the first of the month. That transfer had kept a roof over my parents' heads ever since my father lost his executive position and refused to tell his social circle. With a steady hand, I tapped the screen and permanently deleted the autodraft. Next, I navigated to the automotive section. Chloe drove a brand new Range Rover to keep up with her influencer aesthetic. She convinced everyone Brad bought it for her as a wedding anniversary gift. The truth was that Brad's credit score was so low he could not even secure a loan for a bicycle. I canceled the monthly lease payment and revoked the guarantor status. I watched the screen refresh. The available balance in their accounts plummeted to 0. The safety net I had woven for them was completely dismantled. They were officially free-falling, and they did not even realize gravity was about to hit them. My phone screen flashed with an incoming text message from Brad. The preview text rolled across the top of my display. "Nia, what the hell is wrong with the family card? The bartender is threatening to call security over a $10,000 tab. Fix this right now." I stared at the demand. There was no inquiry about my health. There was only the arrogant expectation that the family scapegoat would immediately fix a financial inconvenience for the white knight who had married into our family. Brad truly believed he was doing us a favor by gracing our black family with his presence. He felt entitled to my money simply because he existed. Another text immediately followed. Chloe is crying, Nia. Stop playing games and call the bank. Dad is furious. I slowly typed my response. I did not use anger. I used absolute clinical precision. There is no game, Brad. The card is permanently closed. Tell Dad to use his own money. I am currently in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. Enjoy the concert. I hit send and locked the screen. The satisfaction was a potent drug warming my blood better than any pain medication the hospital could provide. I knew exactly what was happening in that VIP suite. The absolute humiliation of having a card declined in front of Atlanta high society was my mother's worst nightmare. She had spent decades building an identity around supreme wealth and exclusivity. To be treated like a common thief by stadium security would shatter her carefully constructed reality. Less than a minute later, my phone began vibrating violently. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Desmond Adams never called me unless he needed someone to yell at. I accepted the call and pressed the phone to my ear. What kind of stunt are you pulling? Nia. His voice boomed through the speaker, vibrating with suppressed rage. He was clearly speaking through gritted teeth, trying to keep his voice down so the other wealthy patrons in the suite would not hear him panicking. I am not pulling a stunt, Dad, I replied, my voice perfectly level. I am recovering from a ruptured appendix. I do not care about your stomachache, he hissed. You need to call American Express right now and authorize this charge. You are embarrassing your mother in front of the entire board of directors. Brad had to give the manager his driver license as collateral. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for our family legacy? I pressed the phone closer to my face. The pain in my abdomen flared, but I ignored it. Our family legacy, I asked quietly. You mean the legacy I pay for Dad? You mean the legacy that leaves me bleeding in a hospital while you drink champagne on my account? There is no glitch. I froze the card. I also canceled the mortgage payment for the Buckhead house and Chloe's car lease. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a few seconds, the only sound was the distant, muffled thumping of the stadium concert. You did what my father finally whispered, his voice stripped of all its usual booming authority. You heard me, I said. You and Mom told me I was a burden tonight. You said my children were a nuisance. You made it very clear that Taylor Swift tickets were more important than my life, so I am taking my burden elsewhere. Nia, listen to me. My father's tone shifted from angry to commanding, trying to regain the upper hand. You will unfreeze that account immediately, or I will personally see to it that you are cut out of this family entirely. You will get nothing. You will be nothing. Do you understand me? I let out a soft, breathless laugh. The threat of being cut out of a family that only existed because I funded it was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. Cut me out, Dad. I smiled into the phone. Please do. Let us see how long the Addams family legacy lasts without my bank account keeping the lights on. Before he could utter another word, I ended the call. I turned the phone on silent and placed it face down on the bedside table. I closed my eyes and let the steady rhythm of the heart monitor lull me into a deep, restful sleep. I had survived the surgery. Now it was their turn to try and survive reality. The scene shifts from the sterile quiet of my recovery room to the deafening pulse of the stadium VIP suite. Bass thumps through the glass walls overlooking the concert, but the real performance is happening at the premium marble bar. Brad is standing there with a face as red as a sunburn. He is holding my black American Express card between his fingers, tapping it aggressively against the counter. He is wearing his tailored linen suit, attempting to project the effortless wealth of his ancestors. But right now, he just looks like a man who has been caught stealing. The bartender pushes the card back across the marble. He politely explains that the transaction has been declined. Brad lets out a sharp, condescending laugh. He leans over the bar, invading the bartender's space. He demands the card be run again, claiming the machine must be broken because an Addams family card does not get declined. The bartender swipes it a second time. The machine flashes a bright red error message. The bartender shakes his head and steps back, refusing to serve another round of top-shelf liquor. Brad slams his fist against the bar. His polite, cultured mask vanishes instantly. He demands to see the manager. He shouts that he is a VIP guest and expects to be treated with the respect his family name commands. Within seconds, the stadium hospitality manager arrives. She is a striking black woman in a sharp navy suit radiating absolute authority. She does not flinch at Brad's raised voice or his aggressive posture. She calmly asks for the card and checks the terminal. Brad crosses his arms and puffs out his chest. He leans in close and tries to intimidate her using his favorite tactic. He asks her if she has any idea who his father-in-law is. He drops Desmond Adams' name as if it were a magic spell guaranteed to make everyone in Atlanta bow down. He tells her that Desmond practically built the city and that firing her would take exactly one phone call. The manager looks up from the terminal and meets Brad's eyes with a look of pure ice. She does not apologize. She does not cower. Instead, she raises her voice just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. She informs Brad that the card has not just been declined. It has been actively flagged by the primary account holder as frozen and potentially stolen. She tells him that stadium security will be required to confiscate the card unless the primary account holder is present to verify her identity. The word stolen echoes through the VIP suite. The music suddenly feels muted compared to the heavy silence that falls over the room. At a nearby leather booth, my mother Valerie is frozen. She is surrounded by her elite Buckhead socialite friends, women dripping in diamonds and wrapped in designer silk. They all stop talking and turn to stare at the bar. Valerie's perfect smile shatters. She watches in absolute horror as her son-in-law is publicly humiliated and accused of using a stolen credit card. Her friends exchange knowing glances and cover their mouths to hide their whispers. Valerie's entire identity is built on projecting flawless generational wealth, and in a matter of seconds that facade crumbles in front of the exact people she desperately wants to impress. Chloe rushes over to Brad, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the manager. She looks frantic, her influencer aesthetic ruined by the sheer panic on her face. She begs the manager to wait, claiming it is just a terrible bank error. But the manager simply crosses her arms and signals for two stadium security guards to step closer. Desmond realizes the situation is spiraling out of control. His jaw clenches so tightly a muscle twitches in his cheek. He cannot fix this with a smile or a bribe because he does not actually have the money. He storms out of the suite and pushes through the heavy glass doors into the private hallway. The thumping bass of the concert fades into a dull hum. He pulls out his phone and dials my number again, his face a mask of pure fury. Back in my hospital room, my phone lights up. The vibration against the plastic tray table sounds incredibly loud in the quiet space. I look at the screen and see my father's name. I take a slow, deep breath, feeling the pull of my fresh stitches. I press the green accept button and hold the phone to my ear. I do not say hello. I just wait. Desmond explodes the second the line connects. His voice is a low, vicious hiss echoing through the phone. He demands to know what kind of bank error has frozen the family accounts. He tells me that my mother is sitting in the suite crying out of sheer embarrassment because the security guards are threatening to escort them off the premises. He orders me to call my private banker immediately and fix the glitch before their reputation is permanently destroyed. I let him rant. I listen to the panic and the rage in his voice. I wait until he runs out of breath. Then I speak. My voice is quiet, calm, and completely detached. The bank did not freeze it, Dad. I did. The line goes dead silent. I can picture him standing in that stadium hallway, his mind struggling to comprehend what I just said. I continue speaking my words sharp and precise. There is no glitch. I am no longer funding your fake lifestyle. You left me bleeding on a gurney because a pop concert was more important to you than my life. You told me my children were a burden. So I am relieving you of that burden. You are cut off. All of you. Desmond lets out a sound of pure outrage. He cannot process that the daughter he has spent a lifetime stepping on is finally fighting back. He falls back on the only weapon he thinks he has. He tries to use the same psychological manipulation that worked when I was a teenager. He lowers his voice, attempting to sound incredibly dangerous. He tells me that if I do not turn the money back on right now, I am dead to him. He threatens to disown me. He says he will cut me entirely out of the family legacy and ensure I never receive a single dime of the Adams fortune. I lie there in my hospital bed and a genuine smile spreads across my face. It is the most beautiful threat I have ever heard. He is threatening to cut me out of a legacy that I built. He is threatening to withhold a fortune that only exists in my bank account. I smile into the phone. I tell him to go right ahead. Then I press the red button and hang up. I set the phone down and stare at the ceiling. The true power imbalance has finally been established, and my family has absolutely no idea what is coming next. 3 weeks have passed since that phone call. My physical recovery has been smooth, and my absolute silence has clearly driven my family to the brink of insanity. For 21 days, my phone has been a continuous stream of blocked calls, unread text messages, and increasingly frantic voicemails. I have ignored every single one. I spent those 3 weeks healing my body, playing in the backyard with my twins, and meticulously auditing every financial tie I ever had to the Adams family name. I severed them all. I watched their auto drafts bounce. I watched their country club memberships get suspended. I watched their digital subscriptions fail. I stand in the sunlit center of my design studio, my hands gliding over a set of massive architectural blueprints. As a luxury real estate designer and stager for Atlanta's true elite, my attention to detail has to be flawless. I trace the lines of a multi-million-dollar commercial property, completely absorbed in my work. My family still thinks I run a small, struggling decoration business from a rented townhouse. They have always belittled my career, calling me a simple home decorator while praising Brad's non-existent tech company. They have no idea about the corporate empire I have built under a web of LLCs. They have no idea about the sheer volume of liquid cash I control. A sudden, aggressive pounding echoes from the front door. The violent thudding shatters the peace of my morning, rattling the glass panes of my entryway. I do not rush. I carefully set my pen down on the drafting table. I adjust my silk robe, take a slow sip of my herbal tea, and walk toward the foyer, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. The pounding grows louder, accompanied by the muffled sound of my mother's frantic voice demanding that I open the door right this second. I unlock the deadbolt and pull the heavy mahogany door open. I am met with a scene of absolute pathetic chaos on my porch. My mother Valerie, my father Desmond, my sister Chloe and her husband Brad stand there looking like they just survived a high society natural disaster. Their usual polished buckhead aesthetic is completely destroyed. Valerie is wearing a designer tracksuit, but her hair is frizzy and her eyes are wild with panic. Desmond's golf shirt is wrinkled and he is sweating profusely despite the cool morning air. Chloe looks the worst of all. Her face is red and blotchy, streaked with day-old mascara, and she is clutching a designer handbag like it is a life preserver. Chloe does not even say hello. She lunges forward, her voice breaking into a hysterical screech. She screams that a tow truck showed up at their driveway at dawn. She is practically hyperventilating as she describes the absolute horror of watching her customized white Range Rover being hooked up and dragged away right in front of the neighborhood association president. She blames me for her public humiliation. She demands to know why the lease payments bounced, and why the leasing office treated her like a criminal when she called to scream at them. I stand silently in the doorway, leaning slightly against the doorframe, letting her screeching voice wash over me. I do not offer a single word of comfort. I simply raise one eyebrow and wait for the rest of them to speak. Valerie shoves Chloe aside. She does not ask how my incisions are healing. She does not ask if Zion and Zuri are okay after the trauma of my medical emergency. Instead, she steps forward, attempting to use her physical presence to bully her way into my home. She orders me to get off my high horse, pick up my phone, and fix what she calls a ridiculous bank glitch immediately. Valerie's voice drips with venom as she informs me that Brad has a crucial dinner tonight with high-profile investors from New York. She snaps that Brad is on the verge of securing a massive round of funding for his tech startup, and he absolutely cannot be expected to arrive at a 5-star steakhouse in a rented Uber like some commoner. She insists that I need to wire $10,000 to Brad's personal account to cover the dinner and to stop this petty temper tantrum over a little stomachache. She actually tries to push past my shoulder to enter the foyer, fully expecting me to yield the way I have my entire life. I do not step aside. I plant my feet firmly on the threshold and physically block the doorway. I cross my arms over my chest and look my mother dead in the eye. I watch the arrogant expectation on her face slowly falter as she realizes I am not the compliant scapegoat she is used to bullying. The air between us turns to ice. "This is not a glitch, Mom," I say, my voice terrifyingly calm and perfectly clear. "I am not having a temper tantrum. I am simply removing myself from your payroll. I am no longer funding your fake generational wealth lifestyle while you leave my children to be raised by strangers in a hospital waiting room. Consider this an eviction notice from my wallet." The reality of my words hangs in the heavy, humid air. Desmond looks like he is going to have a heart attack right there on my welcome mat. He opens and closes his mouth, but cannot find the words to counter my absolute financial control. Valerie takes a step back, the sheer shock of being cut off completely paralyzing her. For a family obsessed with image, the reality of poverty is a fatal blow. But the silence only lasts for exactly 1 second before Brad decides to intervene. Brad, who has spent the last 5 years living rent-free in my family's mansion and eating off my credit cards, steps up to the front of the group. He puffs out his chest, trying to use his height and his inherent arrogance to intimidate me. He adjusts the lapels of his cheap blazer and attempts to project the formidable authority of his bankrupt ancestors. He points a trembling finger directly at my face. He tells me that my sudden and malicious withdrawal of financial support constitutes a direct breach of a verbal contract. He starts throwing around ridiculous legal jargon claiming promissory estoppel and detrimental reliance. He threatens to call his family lawyers and drag me into court. He says he will sue me for emotional distress, financial damages, and the loss of his potential business investments if I do not restore their credit lines right this second. Brad finishes his ridiculous legal threat and takes a deep breath, clearly expecting me to cower at the mention of lawsuits and financial damages. When I simply stand there with an amused smile playing on my lips, his strategy immediately shifts. The aggressive bully routine did not work, so he pivots to the patronizing corporate mansplainer. He takes half a step back, adjusting the lapels of his wrinkled linen suit, and drops his voice into an insufferably calm and condescending register. "Listen, Nia," he sighs, running a hand through his thinning hair as if dealing with a stubborn toddler. "Let the adults handle the finances today. You are just a home decorator. You play with paint swatches and throw pillows for a living. You do not understand how liquidity works in the real world. My investors are expecting a certain level of capital deployment tonight, and your little emotional glitch with the family accounts is disrupting high-level corporate synergy. Just make the transfer. Let the adults get back to building actual wealth, and you can go back to matching curtain fabrics." The sheer audacity of his speech hangs in the air of my foyer. Chloe nods along with his words, finding comfort in his arrogant delusion, while my parents look momentarily relieved that a man has stepped in to put me in my place. They genuinely believe his performance. They believe he is a titan of industry being inconvenienced by a bitter spinster. I do not raise my voice. I do not break eye contact with him. Instead, I slowly turn around and walk a few steps to the sleek marble console table sitting in my entryway. I open the top drawer and pull out a pristine, heavy manila folder. I had my forensic accountant compile this dossier days ago, anticipating this exact confrontation. The folder is thick with certified bank records, corporate filings, and background checks. I turn back around and walk directly past Brad, completely ignoring his imposing stance. I stop in front of my sister. I hold the folder out to Chloe. She stares at it blankly for a second before her manicured hands slowly take it from my grasp. "I understand liquidity perfectly, Brad," I say, my voice ringing out clear and cold against the high ceilings of my foyer. "For instance, I understand exactly how your trust fund completely dried up 5 years ago." I watch the smug, patronizing smile instantly vanish from Brad's face. The color drains from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale. I turn my attention back to my sister, who is now opening the folder with trembling fingers. I watch Chloe's eyes dart across the first page of certified financial summaries. Keep reading, Chloe, I instruct her calmly. Look at the highlighted sections. Brad has not had a single liquid asset since before you two even met. That venture capital firm he claims to run is a registered shell company with a $0 balance. But what I find truly fascinating about his understanding of liquidity is how he has been using your social security number to open shadow credit lines to fund a fake crypto startup. Chloe physically staggers backward as she flips to the second page. She is staring at credit card statements bearing her name, statements showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in high-risk server purchases, luxury travel expenses, and lavish business dinners. She shakes her head, muttering that she never authorized any of this. I step closer to her, ensuring my parents can hear every single word. You did not have to authorize it, Chloe, I explained softly, because he knew the statements were going to a post office box he controls. And he knew that the minimum payments on those massive fraudulent debts were being automatically drafted from the primary family account. The account that I have been funding for the last 3 years. I have been paying off the debt your husband fraudulently racked up in your name simply because I was the one keeping the family above water. Your white knight is completely bankrupt, Chloe. He married you because he needed a host to feed on. Desmond lets out a sharp gasp. My father prides himself on being an elite Atlanta businessman, a patriarch who can spot a bad deal from a mile away. The realization that he has spent years boasting at the country club about his brilliant son-in-law, only to discover that the man is a total fraud draining the family dry, hits him like a physical blow. Desmond stares at Brad with a look of absolute horror and deep burning humiliation. He steps forward, demanding to see the papers in Chloe's hands, his voice cracking as he asks Brad if this is true. Brad cannot even formulate a sentence. He is sweating profusely, backing away toward the porch railing, stuttering incoherent syllables as his entire facade collapses into dust. But Valerie cannot accept it. My mother's entire identity is tied to the illusion of perfection. She has spent her life telling anyone who would listen that Chloe married into an elite, wealthy family using Brad's race and supposed old money background as the ultimate trophy to parade around Atlanta's high society. If Brad is a broke scammer, then Valerie's entire social standing is a humiliating joke. The psychological break happens in a split second. Valerie lets out a visceral, guttural scream. She lunges forward, her manicured hands striking out with vicious force. She violently slaps the heavy manila folder right out of Chloe's hands. The thick stack of certified financial documents explodes into the air, fluttering and scattering across my pristine hardwood floor. Valerie places herself physically between me and Chloe, shielding the golden child from the truth. She points a shaking manicured finger inches from my nose. "You are a liar!" she shrieks, her voice echoing wildly through the open doorway. "You are a bitter, jealous liar, Nia. You could not find a good man to save your life, so you paid someone to forge these documents just to destroy your sister's happiness. You are so jealous of Chloe's perfect marriage that you are making up these sick, twisted fantasies. You are trying to ruin the only good thing this family has because you are nothing but a miserable single mother." She stands there, chest heaving, desperately trying to sweep the reality of their utter ruin under the rug of her own delusion. Desmond finally breaks the spell of my mother's hysterical screaming. He grabs Valerie tightly by the arm and drags her away from me toward the porch steps. He does not say a single word to me. He just glares at Brad with a look of utter, absolute disgust. Chloe trails behind them, sobbing into her hands while Brad tries to offer pathetic excuses that nobody wants to hear. They pile into Desmond's leased sedan and speed away, leaving the scattered certified documents blowing across my foyer floor. I calmly close the heavy mahogany door and lock the deadbolt. I kneel down and gather the papers, placing them neatly back into the manila folder. I pour myself a fresh cup of herbal tea and go to bed. I sleep better that night than I have in years. The peace shatters exactly 14 hours later. My phone begins vibrating continuously on my marble kitchen island. The notifications sound like a rapid fire alarm. I unlock the screen to find hundreds of direct messages and tags on Instagram. I click on the top alert and Chloe's face immediately fills my screen. She is broadcasting live to her 500,000 followers. She has perfectly styled messy hair and is wearing an oversized cashmere sweater designed to make her look incredibly fragile and vulnerable. She is sitting on the floor of a luxury hotel room, wiping away perfectly timed tears with the sleeve of her sweater. Chloe looks directly into the camera lens and spins a heartbreaking, fabricated story of severe family betrayal. She claims that her bitter single mother sister is actively trying to destroy her marriage out of pure spite. She tells her massive audience that I have always been deeply jealous of her perfect life and her loving husband. She blatantly accuses me of forging financial documents to frame Brad for fraud simply because I am miserable alone and desperate for attention. She weaponizes her influencer platform with surgical precision, urging her followers to send her love, while simultaneously directing a wave of digital hate toward the toxic family member trying to tear down her happiness. The comments pour in by the thousands. Her devoted followers call me a monster, a jealous spinster, and a terrible sister who deserves to be cut off forever. 30 minutes later, the real-world consequences of her broadcast begin. My private business line rings. It is Eleanor Vance, one of Buckhead's most prominent real estate developers. I have been staging her multi-million-dollar luxury properties for 3 years. Eleanor clears her throat and awkwardly explains that she needs to cancel our contract for the upcoming spring showcase immediately. She claims she absolutely cannot have her pristine corporate brand associated with messy online drama. Before I can even process the massive cancellation, a second call comes in, then a third. High-end clients who pay tens of thousands of dollars for my discretion and sharp aesthetic are jumping ship in droves. They all repeat the same carefully worded corporate excuses about protecting their professional image from social media scandals. Chloe's manufactured tears are costing me actual significant revenue. I do not panic. Panic is a luxury reserved for people who do not have a backup plan. I pick up my phone and dial my executive assistant, Marcus. He answers on the first ring, his voice tight with mounting concern over the flood of cancellation emails hitting our secure server. I tell him to completely ignore the cancellations. I instruct him to open his encrypted laptop and draft an anonymous email to the Atlanta Financial Insider. It is the most ruthless and widely read business blog in the state, a platform notorious for destroying corporate reputations with verified leaks. I dictate the blind item word for word, ensuring maximum collateral damage. I tell Marcus to write about a prominent fake Atlanta real estate mogul who has been running his entire empire on empty credit lines and his eldest daughter's secret charity. I instruct him to mention that this specific patriarch is currently facing imminent eviction from a premier Buckhead country club and is actively harboring a bankrupt son-in-law who funds cryptocurrency scams using stolen identity details. I tell Marcus to attach 3 heavily redacted pages from my financial dossier as undeniable proof. The blogger will know exactly who Desmond Adams is within 5 minutes of reading it. By tomorrow morning, Desmond will not be able to secure a loan for a cup of coffee, let alone maintain his fraudulent facade in the Atlanta business community. Marcus confirms the email is sent and promises to monitor the fallout. I end the call and set my phone face down on the counter. The online chaos continues to swirl wildly around my name, but the silence inside my house remains absolute. I walk into my home office to review the exact financial damage to my staging contracts. I am calculating exactly how to restructure my quarterly projections to absorb the hit when the sharp chime of the doorbell interrupts my intense focus. I check the security monitor on my desk. It is not my parents returning for another screaming match. It is a man in a crisp charcoal uniform holding a thick leather dispatch bag. He is a private corporate courier. I walk to the front door and open it wide. The man does not speak a single word. He simply holds out a digital tablet for my signature. I sign my name with my finger and he hands me a thick, heavy envelope. The paper is rich and deeply textured, feeling more like ancient parchment than standard stationery. I turn the envelope over in my hands, and my breath hitches sharply in my chest. Pressed into the direct center of the flap is a dark red wax seal. Stamped deep into the wax is the unmistakable, intricate crest of a roaring lion holding a ledger. It is the personal seal of Grandpa Ezekiel. He is the fearsome patriarch of our extended family, a man who lives in absolute seclusion on a sprawling, heavily guarded estate in Savannah. He is a self-made billionaire who ruthlessly cut ties with Desmond a decade ago, disgusted by my father's obsession with superficial wealth and social climbing. Ezekiel never calls anyone. He never visits. He only sends formal correspondence when the very foundation of the Addams family is shifting. I slide my thumb under the heavy wax seal, breaking it open as a cold shiver runs all the way down my spine. The paper inside the envelope was thick and crisp. A single sentence was penned in sharp black ink. It did not ask for my presence. It demanded it. Ezekiel Adams expected me at his Savannah estate by noon the following day. There was no mention of the swirling online chaos, no reference to Chloe's tearful broadcast, and no hint as to why the man who had ignored my father for a decade was suddenly calling for me. I packed an overnight bag, my mind racing with every possible scenario. I assumed he was going to tear into me for allowing the family name to be dragged through the digital mud. Grandpa Ezekiel was a man who survived the brutal realities of building a logistics empire during the civil rights era. He did not tolerate weakness, and he certainly did not tolerate public embarrassment. The drive to Savannah was a tense blur of highway miles and ringing cell phones I refused to answer. When I arrived at the wrought iron gates of the Adams estate, armed private security verified my identity before letting me pass. The driveway wound through ancient weeping willows draped in Spanish moss, finally revealing the massive stone manor that Ezekiel had built with sheer grit and absolute ruthlessness. His estate manager, a quiet man in a tailored suit, met me at the front door and led me directly to the west wing. I braced myself as the heavy oak doors to the study swung open. I expected a booming voice. I expected a lecture on family loyalty and the importance of maintaining an impenetrable public front. Instead, I found complete silence. Grandpa Ezekiel sat in a high-backed leather chair positioned in front of a roaring fireplace. He was completely focused on a beautifully carved marble chessboard, playing a complicated game against himself. He did not look up as I walked across the Persian rug. He simply gestured with one weathered hand toward the empty chair opposite him. I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I waited for the inevitable scolding about Chloe's Instagram Live, or the blind item systematically destroying Desmond's remaining credibility in Atlanta. Ezekiel slowly advanced a black knight across the board. He studied the resulting configuration for a long moment before finally speaking. His voice was deep, gravelly, and entirely stripped of emotion. He told me my defensive strategy was solid, but my offensive execution was a little messy. He moved a white pawn and stated that Desmond had always been a fool who mistook a loud voice for actual power. I sat perfectly still, processing the fact that he was entirely ignoring the social media circus. He did not care about Chloe's tears or Brad's fake startup. He cared about the fundamental truth I had exposed. Ezekiel finally looked up, his dark eyes piercing straight through my carefully maintained professional mask. He told me he had been watching my design firm for the last 2 years. He knew about the corporate shielding. He knew about my high-end staging contracts. He knew exactly how much liquid capital I controlled. He did not ask how I built it. He simply acknowledged that I had inherited his business acumen, while my father had only inherited a taste for imported champagne and false prestige. He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick legal binder. He tossed it onto the table beside the chessboard. It landed with a heavy thud. He informed me that Desmond had been quietly mismanaging a significant portion of the family's commercial real estate portfolio. My father had been bleeding the corporate accounts dry to maintain his Buckhead facade, leaving premium retail spaces sitting empty, poorly maintained, and hemorrhaging potential revenue. Ezekiel declared that he was officially stripping Desmond of all managerial rights, effective immediately. He was handing the entire commercial portfolio over to my firm. He wanted me to redesign stage and manage the properties to maximize their market value. The sheer volume of the contract sitting in front of me represented millions in guaranteed revenue. It was the kind of anchor account that took most agencies decades to acquire. I reached for the binder, but Ezekiel placed his large hand flat on top of it. He looked at me with a sharp, calculating smile that mirrored my own. He told me he would sign the contract on one non-negotiable condition. His 80th birthday was approaching at the end of the month. Valerie had been aggressively campaigning for weeks to host a lavish gala at their Buckhead mansion, eager to use the milestone event to secure her spot at the very top of the Atlanta social hierarchy. Ezekiel stated that he had absolutely no intention of letting my parents parade him around like a trophy, while they spent money they no longer had on catering and imported caviar. He tapped the cover of the binder. He demanded that I host the 80th birthday gala at my own home. He wanted the entire family, all of their elite socialite friends, and the top investors in the state to attend. He told me it was time to show Desmond and Valerie what actual unborrowed success looked like. He wanted them to walk into my house and realize exactly who held the real power in the next generation of the Addams family. I stared at him as the full weight of his conditions settled over me. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Grandpa Ezekiel had no idea how perfectly his demand aligned with my own quiet reality. Valerie, Desmond, and Chloe still firmly believed I was a struggling decorator living in a cramped, rented townhouse on the industrial outskirts of the city. They thought I spent my days picking out cheap throw pillows and begging for table scraps to get by. They had never bothered to ask for my actual address in over 3 years because they did not care enough to visit. They had no idea that I had recently closed on a spectacular $4 million architectural masterpiece in Tuxedo Park. They were about to walk into an estate with a sweeping glass facade, floating staircases, and a custom infinity pool that rivaled anything they had ever stepped foot in. And they were going to do it completely blind. I picked up the heavy gold pen sitting next to the chessboard and signed my name on the contract without hesitation. I left Savannah with the ink barely dry on a contract that fundamentally shifted the entire balance of power within the Addams family. The drive back to Atlanta felt completely different than the drive down. The heavy burden of seeking my parents' approval had been entirely replaced by the cold, satisfying weight of absolute control. I was no longer the struggling single mother they pitied. I was the primary custodian of my grandfather's commercial empire and the architect of their impending reality check. My first order of business upon returning to my home office was executing Grandpa Ezekiel's explicit command. I opened my design software and drafted the digital invitations for his 80th birthday gala. I kept the design intentionally minimalist and sleek, using deep charcoal lettering against a crisp ivory background. I did not include the name of a venue. I simply listed the date, the time, and the exact street address of my new $4 million estate in Tuxedo Park. I compiled the guest list carefully. I included every member of our extended family, all of Ezekiel's elite business associates, and perhaps most importantly, every single one of Valerie's high society country club friends. With one click, I sent the invitations out into the digital ether. I set my phone on the desk and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I knew exactly how long it would take for the illusion to crack. 14 minutes later, my phone screen lit up. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before calmly answering. Valerie did not bother with a greeting. Her voice came through the speaker dripping with a toxic mixture of panic and extreme condescension. She demanded to know what on earth I was thinking. She asked if I had completely lost my mind sending out an invitation to the entire Atlanta elite with the address of some random rented event hall. She was speaking so fast she was practically breathless, insisting that this was an absolute disaster for our family brand. "Nia, you cannot be serious!" Valerie scoffed, her tone taking on that familiar patronizing edge she always used when addressing my life choices. "You cannot host Grandpa Ezekiel's milestone birthday at some cheap rented venue you scraped together. Do you have any idea who is on this guest list? These are titans of industry. These are people who understand Black excellence and generational wealth. We need to host this at our Buckhead mansion to reflect the proper image of the Addams family. You are going to humiliate us all. I listened to her desperate clinging to a mansion she could no longer afford. She was entirely ignoring the fact that I had frozen the accounts paying her mortgage. Her delusion was so deeply ingrained that she literally could not process her own financial ruin as long as there was a party to plan. I am not changing the venue, Mom, I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. Grandpa Ezekiel gave me explicit orders. He wants the gala hosted at this specific address. I am simply following his instructions to the letter. Valerie let out a sharp, dramatic sigh. She claimed that Ezekiel was simply testing us and that I was failing the test by being too literal and lacking vision. She ordered me to send out a correction email immediately and transfer the event budget directly to her so she could save the family from my embarrassing lack of taste. The venue remains exactly as printed, I said firmly. See you on the 30th. I hung up the phone before she could utter another screeching complaint. I knew perfectly well that Valerie and Chloe would never accept defeat. In their minds, I was the incompetent family scapegoat who could not be trusted to fold a napkin correctly, let alone host a billionaire's gala. Less than 48 hours later, my property manager at the Tuxedo Park estate flagged a series of highly suspicious delivery schedules. Valerie and Chloe had officially gone rogue. Unable to bully me into moving the party, they had decided to hijack it entirely. They had somehow accessed my old vendor contact list and began aggressively ordering supplies under my name, directing everything to the Tuxedo Park address, which they still firmly believed was just an empty rental hall. They were ordering absolute garbage. They wanted loud, flashy new money aesthetics to project the wealth they no longer possessed. My vendor alerts showed orders for massive, garish gold balloon arches, cheap synthetic floral centerpieces, dyed unnatural colors, and sequined metallic table runners. They had even hired a discount catering company famous for serving mediocre food on dry ice to make it look dramatic for Instagram. They were planning to show up early on the day of the gala, intercept the deliveries, and forcefully decorate the space to save Grandpa from my supposed incompetence. I sat at my desk and genuinely laughed. They were walking blindly into a trap of their own making. I did not call them to argue. I did not cancel their orders. I let them play event planner. I simply called my logistics coordinator and quietly redirected every single one of Valerie and Chloe's cheap, flashy shipments. I routed the balloon arches, the synthetic flowers, and the sequined runners directly to a local youth community center that was hosting a spring dance the following weekend. The charity was thrilled to receive the anonymous donation of party supplies, and my mother's tacky sabotage was completely neutralized. With their interference neatly diverted, I made my real move. I picked up my phone and called the most exclusive ultra-luxury event design firm in Atlanta. It was a boutique agency that Valerie had spent 3 years trying to get off the waitlist for. They catered exclusively to true old money and high-net-worth individuals. When the lead designer answered, I did not ask for a quote. I told him I needed the entire property transformed for a billionaire patriarch's milestone celebration, and I needed absolute perfection. I drove to their design studio that afternoon. I did not use credit cards. I handed over a stack of crisp cashier's checks, paying the exorbitant retainer in full. I ordered thousands of imported white orchids to be draped elegantly across the floating glass staircases of my estate. I secured vintage crystal stemware, bespoke silk linens, and a string quartet from the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. I hired a Michelin-starred private chef to design a customized tasting menu featuring Ezekiel's favorite Southern delicacies, elevated to fine dining standards. I curated an atmosphere of undeniable, breathtaking opulence. It was quiet, powerful, and overwhelmingly expensive. It was the exact opposite of the loud, desperate facade my family had spent their entire lives trying to project. I watched the elite planners begin their meticulous work, knowing that when Valerie and Chloe finally arrived to enact their hostile takeover, they would find no balloon arches to assemble and no rental hall to conquer. They would find only the crushing reality of their own irrelevance. The perspective shifts high above the canopy of Tuxedo Park, offering a sprawling aerial view of the long, curving driveway leading to my estate. A steady, gleaming stream of luxury vehicles glides smoothly through the massive wrought iron gates. Professional valets in crisp white jackets swiftly manage a growing collection of Bentleys, Porsches, and vintage Rolls-Royces, guiding the city's most powerful figures toward the glowing glass facade of my home. The viewpoint smoothly drops from the sky, transitioning into a grounded, steady tracking shot that focuses on a battered silver Uber pulling up to the edge of the pristine cobblestone courtyard. The contrast is violently sharp. Desmond steps out first, his face drawn and exceptionally pale. He is followed by Valerie, who is frantically trying to smooth the wrinkles from her outdated evening gown while looking around in total bewilderment. Chloe slides out next, looking utterly miserable that her leased luxury SUV was quietly repossessed 2 days ago, forcing her into a standard rideshare. Brad trails behind them, nervously adjusting the collar of a suit that suddenly looks tragically cheap against the breathtaking backdrop of real generational wealth. They stand completely frozen on the cobblestones. They were expecting a rented community center or a cheap banquet hall. They were geared up to storm inside ripped-down synthetic decorations and humiliate me in front of Grandpa Ezekiel. Instead, they are staring up at a $4 million architectural marvel. Floor-to-ceiling windows radiate warm golden light across the perfectly manicured lawns. The soft, elegant strains of a live string quartet drift through the open mahogany double doors. Valets immediately approach them, but Desmond waves them off, too stunned to speak. Valerie's jaw is physically dropped. She cranes her neck, desperately searching for a sign that they have the wrong address. She checks her digital invitation, glares at the glowing house numbers carved into the stone pillar, and shakes her head in aggressive denial. She marches toward the entrance with rigid, terrified determination, leading the rest of our fractured family into the lion's den. As they step across the threshold, the sheer magnitude of the event hits them like a physical wall. The foyer is a sweeping, multi-level expanse of white marble and floating glass. Thousands of imported white orchids cascade from the second-floor balconies, filling the air with a clean, expensive fragrance. Waiters in immaculate black ties circulate effortlessly through the crowd, offering crystal flutes of vintage champagne and silver trays of caviar. The room is packed with the absolute upper echelon of Atlanta society. Valerie's eyes dart wildly around the space. She spots Eleanor Vance, the very same real estate developer who canceled my staging contract, chatting amicably with a state senator. Eleanor is not looking at me with disdain. She is looking around my home with naked, calculating awe. Valerie is completely disoriented. Her grand plan to save the family from my embarrassing lack of taste has evaporated into thin air. Valerie grabs the arm of a passing waiter. She demands to know who is in charge of this venue and insists there has been a massive scheduling error. The waiter simply smiles politely, offers her a glass of champagne, and glides away. Desmond is not looking at the waiters. He is looking at the far corner of the room where Grandpa Ezekiel is seated in a custom leather armchair, surrounded by a group of the most powerful investors in the Southeast. Ezekiel is holding court, looking completely in his element, and he has not spared a single glance toward his son. The realization that he has been entirely bypassed in the family hierarchy begins to sink into Desmond's features, draining the last bit of color from his cheeks. Chloe is clutching Brad's arm, staring at the cascading orchids, and realizing that her fake social media tears cannot touch the impenetrable fortress of wealth surrounding her. I do not rush. I wait for the exact right moment to make my presence known. I step out from the second-floor master suite and pause at the top of the floating glass staircase. I am wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that drapes perfectly to the floor. The color is rich and commanding. I place my hand on the glass railing and begin a slow, measured descent. Conversations naturally pause as guests turn to look up. The string quartet smoothly transitions into a softer melody. Valerie spots me halfway down the stairs. Her eyes widen to the size of saucers. She breaks away from Desmond and marches to the bottom of the staircase, planting her feet on the marble floor. Her voice trembles with a mix of fury and desperate confusion. She points a shaking finger at the soaring ceilings and demands to know whose house I borrowed for this charade. She loudly insists that I am trying to bankrupt myself to put on a fake show for my grandfather. I reach the final step and stand inches away from her. I do not raise my voice. I let the absolute certainty of my position carry my words across the quieted foyer. I didn't borrow it, Mom. I closed on it 6 months ago. Welcome to my home. The words strike Valerie with the force of a physical blow. She staggers back half a step. Her mind simply cannot reconcile the bitter, struggling spinster she invented with the powerful, wealthy woman standing in front of her. Chloe lets out a small, pathetic sob, finally realizing that every single lie she told her followers is about to be exposed by the sheer reality of my existence. Desmond simply lowers his head, the crushing weight of his own irrelevance finally snapping his spine. He knows that Ezekiel engineered this exact moment to prove a point, and the point is that Desmond is obsolete. The Addams family legacy has officially bypassed him and landed squarely in my hands. While the rest of my family breaks down under the weight of their own shattered delusions, Brad remains entirely unaffected by the emotional carnage. His survival instinct is purely parasitic. He watches the interaction with a dark, calculating gleam in his eyes. He does not care that his wife is weeping or that his in-laws are utterly humiliated. He only sees the sweeping glass staircases, the imported orchids, and the absolute certainty of my massive, undisclosed wealth. While Chloe buries her face in her hands, Brad smoothly detaches himself from her side. He adjusts his cheap suit jacket, pastes on a slick, charming smile, and casually sidles up to me as I turn toward the marble bar. He leans in close, completely ignoring the tension in the room, and asks if I have 5 minutes to discuss a highly lucrative ground floor investment opportunity in the digital tech space. I look down at Brad's outstretched hand, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated delusion required to pitch a fraudulent crypto scheme to the exact woman who just exposed his financial ruin. I do not shake his hand. I simply take a slow sip of my champagne, letting the silence stretch until the edges of his slick smile begin to strain. I tell him very quietly that he has severely miscalculated his audience. I advise him to enjoy the open bar while he still has the freedom to do so. He blinks, momentarily thrown off balance, but the parasitic drive inside him quickly overrides any sense of shame or self-awareness. He pivots smoothly away from the marble bar, adjusting his lapels with feigned confidence, and wades directly into the sea of Atlanta's true elite. The foyer and adjoining grand ballroom are absolutely packed with the most influential figures in the state. These are not the flashy credit card debt socialites Valerie desperately courts at her country club. These are the genuine pillars of Black excellence. I see the presidents of two major historically Black colleges discussing massive university endowments near the grand piano. I spot a cluster of federal judges sharing a quiet laugh by the terrace doors. Real estate tycoons who own half the commercial skyline are admiring the custom millwork and architectural precision of my dining room. They all know me. They respect my work, my absolute discretion, and the multi-million-dollar corporate empire I built completely under the radar. Several of them raise their glasses to me as I walk past, acknowledging my success without needing to broadcast it. Brad completely misreads the room. He assumes this is a standard low-level networking mixer where cheap charisma and a rented suit can buy influence. I watch from a distance as he aggressively targets a group of seasoned venture capitalists. He pulls thick, glossy business cards from his pocket, passing them out like cheap flyers on a street corner. He speaks entirely too loudly, his voice cutting unpleasantly through the refined, low murmur of the gala. He drops Desmond's name at every single opportunity, leaning heavily on the illusion of the Addams family prestige. He tells anyone who will listen that his father-in-law is a business visionary, completely unaware that the devastating blind item I leaked to the Atlanta Financial Insider has already circulated through every smartphone in the room. The moment Brad mentions Desmond, the venture capitalists exchange sharp, knowing glances. One of them discreetly pulls out his phone, pulling up the article detailing Desmond's imminent country club eviction and empty credit lines. They politely decline Brad's cards, muttering quick dismissive excuses before physically turning their backs on him. Brad does not take the hint. He simply targets a new group near the customized sculpture. He corners an older, highly distinguished man holding a glass of neat bourbon. I decide it is time to end the circus before he embarrasses the family name any further in front of Grandpa Ezekiel's peers. I set my champagne glass down and glide across the marble floor, cutting smoothly through the crowd. I reach Brad just as he is launching into his practiced elevator pitch about revolutionary digital asset liquidity and blockchain synergy. I place a firm hand on his shoulder, interrupting him mid-sentence. I tell Brad that I would love to introduce him to a very special guest of mine. I turn to the distinguished man holding the bourbon and offer a warm, genuine smile. I introduce Arthur Sterling. Arthur is not an angel investor. He is a senior investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he happens to be a very close personal friend of my forensic accountant. Brad's eyes light up with dollar signs. He incorrectly assumes the SEC is just another three-letter acronym representing untethered wealth. He thrusts a glossy business card directly into Arthur's hand, boasting that his startup is on the verge of a massive initial coin offering and that early investors are guaranteed triple-digit returns. Arthur slowly sets his bourbon down on a passing waiter's silver tray. He adjusts his reading glasses and examines the business card with clinical, terrifying precision. Arthur looks up, his expression completely neutral, and states that this is incredibly convenient. Arthur casually mentions that his specific federal division is currently finalizing a massive review of Brad's exact company. Arthur locks eyes with Brad and clearly calmly states that the subpoenas for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and securities violations are scheduled to be served by federal marshals on Monday morning. The color instantly drains from Brad's face, leaving him looking like a sickly chalk outline. He takes a sharp, gasping breath, inhaling a mouthful of his own whiskey. He violently chokes, coughing and sputtering as the burning liquid catches in his throat. His slick, arrogant facade disintegrates into absolute panic. He does not excuse himself. He does not try to save face or offer a smooth rebuttal. He physically shoves past a waiter, nearly knocking over a tray of expensive hors d'oeuvres, and scurries toward the guest bathrooms like a rat fleeing a burning building. Arthur chuckles quietly, tucking the business card into his breast pocket as physical evidence for his Monday morning meetings. Across the room, Chloe has watched the entire humiliating exchange unfold. She is standing near the grand fireplace, her knuckles turning bone white as she grips the edge of the heavy stone mantel. She sees her husband fleeing in terror. She sees our parents hovering near the exit, utterly broken by the reality of my estate. And she sees me standing shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful men in Atlanta, receiving their genuine respect and admiration. The jealousy radiating from her is almost tangible, burning through the cool elegance of the room. Chloe's entire identity is built on being the superior golden child, and I have effortlessly stripped that title away in a single evening. I watch her eyes narrow as a dark, frantic calculation crosses her face. She is entirely unwilling to accept defeat or fade into the background. She looks toward the raised dais at the end of the ballroom, where a microphone and a large digital projector are set up for the evening's main presentation. I am scheduled to officially unveil the commercial portfolio contract to Grandpa Ezekiel in front of the entire assembly in exactly 20 minutes. Chloe's gaze locks onto the audio-visual equipment connecting the main screen. Her face twists into a mask of bitter, reckless determination. She refuses to let me outshine her, and she begins moving silently through the crowd, actively preparing to burn the entire gala to the ground to stop my moment of triumph. I tracked Chloe out of the corner of my eye as she slipped away from the main ballroom. Her movements were jerky and frantic, driven by a toxic cocktail of sheer panic and unchecked narcissism. She bypassed the catering corridors and made a direct line for the secluded audiovisual suite I had set up near the rear of the dais. The room was temporarily empty while my technical director was out on the floor conducting a final sound check. It was a brief window of opportunity, and Chloe seized it with the desperate enthusiasm of a drowning woman grasping at a razor-sharp life preserver. Through the cracked door, I watched her slide into the leather chair in front of the master control laptop. She did not possess the technical skills to launch a sophisticated cyber attack, but she knew exactly how to drag and drop files from a USB drive. I had intentionally left the presentation folder unlocked. I knew perfectly well that Chloe could never resist the urge to insert herself into the center of attention. I watched her delete the file labeled Ezekiel Legacy Tribute and replace it with a massive video file she pulled from her designer clutch. She quickly renamed her file to match the original clicked save and scurried out of the room via the side exit looking incredibly smug. She genuinely believed she had just orchestrated the ultimate coup. 10 minutes later, the crystal chandeliers dimmed to a soft ambient glow. The string quartet concluded their symphony, letting the final elegant notes resonate through the soaring architecture of my home. The low murmur of Atlanta's most powerful brokers, tycoons, and politicians gradually faded into a respectful silence. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald gown and walked calmly up the steps of the dais. The spotlight shifted, bathing me in a crisp white glow. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw my mother and father standing rigidly near the front, clutching their champagne flutes like shields. I saw Brad sweating profusely near the exit doors, constantly checking his phone for federal alerts. And I saw Chloe standing dead center, a victorious smirk plastered across her face, waiting for my impending humiliation. I approached the microphone. I thanked our distinguished guests for gathering in my home to honor a man who had literally shaped the commercial landscape of the city. I spoke briefly about Grandpa Ezekiel's ruthless dedication, his unwavering vision, and the heavy sacrifices required to build generational wealth. I kept my words concise and powerful. I finished by saying that instead of merely talking about his legacy, I wanted to show everyone exactly what the Adams name represented. I signaled my technical director to roll the tribute video. The massive digital projector hummed to life. The screen dropped down behind me, spanning 20 feet across the marble wall. Valerie puffed out her chest, ready to bask in the glow of her father-in-law's achievements. Grandpa Ezekiel leaned forward in his leather armchair, expecting a dignified retrospective of his 50-year career. Instead, a deafening, heavily synthesized bass drop rattled the crystal glassware on every table in the room. The screen exploded with blinding neon colors. Chloe's face appeared magnified to 20 feet wide, heavily filtered and caked in shimmering contour makeup. She was holding up a brightly colored bottle of discount detox vitamins. Upbeat, royalty-free pop music blared through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. The video cut rapidly to a montage of Chloe posing on the hoods of cars she did not own, twirling in cheap fast fashion outfits, and blowing exaggerated kisses to the camera. Massive flashing text graphics urged the audience to use her promo code for 15% off synthetic hair extensions. It was a loud, garish, desperate reel of pure vanity. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The elite tycoons and federal judges did not gasp. They did not laugh. They simply froze in a state of profound secondhand embarrassment. HBCU presidents stared at the screen with blank, uncomprehending expressions. State senators exchanged uncomfortable, pitying glances. Valerie let out a strangled, horrified sound, dropping her champagne flute onto the marble floor, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. Desmond buried his face in his hands physically, unable to look at the screen or at his father. Grandpa Ezekiel did not move a single muscle. He stared at the projection of his granddaughter, aggressively shilling diet tea with a look of such absolute freezing disdain that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chloe's victorious smirk faltered. She had expected the room to be dazzled by her digital influence. She expected whispers of awe regarding her supposed brand partnerships. But as the loud, obnoxious music echoed through the cavernous space, she finally registered the sheer suffocating weight of the silence. She was not being admired. She was being universally pitied by the exact social circle she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Her face burned crimson as the full magnitude of her horrific miscalculation crashed down upon her. I let the video play for exactly 45 seconds. I let the humiliation completely saturate her bones. Then I calmly pulled a sleek silver remote from the pocket, hidden in the folds of my gown. I did not panic. I did not look flustered. I pressed a single button, killing the audio and pausing Chloe's heavily filtered face mid-pout. I stepped back up to the microphone. My voice was perfectly steady and laced with cold amusement. "It seems my sister wanted to share her sponsor deals with us," I said, the crisp sound of my voice cutting through the heavy, awkward air. But Grandpa Ezekiel taught me that true legacy isn't built on Instagram likes. It's built on ownership. I clicked the remote a second time, executing the system override I had programmed hours before the event. The screen flashed black for a fraction of a second. Chloe's vanity reel vanished entirely. In its place, a series of high-resolution authenticated legal documents appeared on the massive screen. They were real-time property deeds, certified corporate filings, and ironclad transfer agreements. The documents laid out the exact holding structures of the Adams commercial portfolio. The names on the screen were highlighted in bold black text. Every single deed, every corporate charter, and every controlling stake listed my name as the sole absolute proprietor. The crowd leaned in their eyes, scanning the legal jargon and the massive valuation figures stamped across the documents. The realization rippled through the room like an electric current. I was not just throwing a party. I had completely, legally, and quietly devoured the entire family empire. I clicked the remote one final time, pulling up the master deed to the $4 million estate we were currently standing in, just to drive the final nail into the coffin. The undeniable proof of my ownership hung glowing on the massive screen behind me. The silence in the ballroom was no longer just shocked. It was reverent. The city's most powerful brokers, tycoons, and politicians were actively reevaluating the entire Adams family dynamic right in front of my eyes. They were looking at me not as Desmond's quiet daughter, but as the apex predator who had successfully swallowed a commercial empire without making a single sound. Desmond's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. His entire identity, his entire sense of superiority, was being surgically dismantled in front of the exact people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. His ego simply could not process the public execution of his legacy. Driven by a toxic mix of adrenaline and sheer desperation, he lunged forward. He snatched a secondary wireless microphone from a stand near the grand piano and marched to the center of the marble floor directly below the dais. He let out a loud, forceful laugh that echoed awkwardly off the soaring glass walls. It was a hollow, grating sound that made several federal judges cringe. "A wonderful joke from my highly imaginative daughter," Desmond boomed, his voice trembling as sweat visibly beaded on his forehead. "Let us give a big hand to Nia for her little digital prank. She always did have a flair for the dramatic." Nobody clapped. Not a single person in the room moved a muscle. The silence was absolute and suffocating. Desmond aggressively ignored the freezing reception. He paced the floor, gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He launched into a rambling, pompous speech, desperately trying to hijack the narrative and wrestle back control of the room. He puffed out his chest and began projecting his voice, speaking in grand, sweeping terms about the true meaning of generational wealth. He talked about the Adams legacy, the blood, sweat, and tears he had supposedly poured into the Atlanta real estate market, and the heavy burden of leadership. He waved his free hand wildly toward the back of the room, gesturing for Brad to come forward. Brad was still pale and visibly shaking from his terrifying encounter with the SEC investigator, but his parasitic instincts kicked in. Seeing an opportunity to attach himself to Desmond's fabricated empire, Brad adjusted his cheap suit and scurried to his father-in-law's side, pasting on a slick, nauseating smile. "The Adams legacy requires strong, visionary leadership." Desmond projected, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "Which is why tonight, on this historic occasion, I am officially announcing my retirement. I am passing the torch of my real estate empire to my brilliant son-in-law, Brad. Together, we will lead this family into the next century of unparalleled success." Chloe instantly perked up. Despite the crushing humiliation of her vanity video, she saw a desperate lifeline. She straightened her posture and tried to look triumphant, believing that her father's grand declaration could magically overwrite the glowing legal documents still projected on the screen behind me. Then a sharp, rhythmic sound cut through the heavy air. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a silver-tipped cane striking the polished marble floor. The crowd of senators, investors, and real estate tycoons physically parted. They moved back with hushed, respectful urgency, clearing a wide path through the center of the ballroom. Grandpa Ezekiel rose from his custom leather armchair. He did not look like an 80-year-old man celebrating a birthday. He looked like a king who had finally grown tired of watching jesters play in his court. He moved toward the dais with terrifying, measured precision. The sheer gravity of his presence commanded absolute authority. A state senator standing nearby immediately handed Ezekiel a microphone. "You can't pass a torch that burned out 5 years ago." Desmond Grandpa Ezekiel's voice boomed over the surround sound system, rich, deep, and dripping with absolute disgust. Desmond froze. The microphone in his hand dropped an inch. Valerie let out a quiet, strangled whimper, shrinking back against a massive floral arrangement, as if trying to physically disappear into the leaves. Ezekiel did not look at his son. He turned slowly, sweeping his sharp, calculating gaze across the room of Atlanta's elite. He held his head high, stripping away the very last shred of Desmond's dignity in front of his peers. "My son loves to speak of an empire." Ezekiel continued, his voice echoing like thunder across the marble foyer. "But the only thing Desmond has built is a towering monument to his own spectacular incompetence. He hasn't owned a successful, profitable property in over half a decade. Every single venture he touched crumbled under his gross mismanagement, his arrogance, and his sheer laziness." The ballroom erupted in a collective, quiet gasp. The venture capitalists who had just rejected Brad's business cards now looked at Desmond as if he carried a highly contagious disease. Ezekiel turned slowly and pointed his silver-tipped cane directly at Desmond's chest. "When his fake empire collapsed, my son didn't roll up his sleeves and work. He didn't rebuild. He became a common thief. To fund his country club memberships, his wife's pathetic social climbing, and his youngest daughter's fraudulent internet lifestyle, Desmond has been secretly and illegally draining the family trust." Valerie covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud, ragged sob. Chloe stood completely paralyzed, her carefully constructed digital facade burning to ash in the harsh light of the real world. Brad physically took 2 large steps away from Desmond, desperately trying to sever his ties to a sinking ship before he was dragged down with it. "He bled the legacy I built with my own 2 hands entirely dry just to lease luxury cars and buy fake friends," Ezekiel stated, his voice cold and brutally final. "He thought I was too old and too blind to notice his theft. He was wrong. And that is exactly why I authorized Nia to quietly, legally, and permanently strip him of every single asset attached to the Adams name." The deafening silence following my display of the authenticated property deeds is violently shattered by a sound resembling a wounded animal. Valerie breaks out of her shock and launches into a hysterical, screeching denial. She completely abandons the refined high society persona she has spent decades cultivating. She points a manicured, trembling finger at me from across the marble foyer, her voice echoing terribly against the soaring glass architecture. She screams that this is a vicious, fabricated lie. She yells that I am an envious, spiteful manipulator who has intentionally poisoned her father-in-law's mind. She desperately tries to convince the room that I have orchestrated a massive psychotic conspiracy to steal the empire that rightfully belongs to her husband. Grandpa Ezekiel does not raise his voice. He does not even look angry. He looks deeply, profoundly bored by her pathetic hysterics. He signals to one of his personal aides standing quietly in the shadows near the grand piano. The aide steps forward and places a heavy brass-cornered briefcase onto the small table beside Ezekiel's leather armchair. The sharp metallic click of the latches springing open echoes loudly across the room, cutting off Valerie's frantic screaming. Ezekiel reaches inside the briefcase and pulls out a massive, densely packed stack of bound financial ledgers. He tosses them onto the table with a heavy, echoing thud. "Nia didn't tell me anything," Valerie Ezekiel states, his voice cutting through her remaining protests like a scalpel. "My accountants did." Valerie freezes. The color drains completely from her face. leaving her looking gray and suddenly incredibly old. She looks at Desmond for backup, desperately needing him to defend their honor. But Desmond is staring at the floor, absolutely paralyzed. The elite guests surrounding them, the federal judges, the university presidents, and the real estate tycoons lean in, captivated by the brutal surgical exposure of the family they once thought were their peers. Ezekiel rests his weathered hands on the silver handle of his cane. He tells the captivated room that for the past 3 years, a team of forensic auditors has been tracking every single penny moving in and out of Desmond's corporate and personal accounts. The illusion of success was completely flawless from the outside, but the foundation was rotten to its absolute core. Ezekiel turns his attention directly to Valerie, dismantling the very center of her overwhelming pride. He reveals that the massive Buckhead mansion she parades around in the house she uses as a weapon to belittle everyone else in her social circle is entirely leveraged. Desmond did not just take out a second mortgage to maintain their extravagant country club lifestyle. When that money dried up, he secretly took out a third highly predatory mortgage with astronomical interest rates just to cover his mounting failures. I watch Valerie's knees physically buckle under the weight of the revelation. She grabs Desmond's arm, her eyes wild, begging him to tell her the old man is lying or mistaken. Desmond cannot even meet her gaze. He has kept the third mortgage a complete secret from his wife, living in absolute suffocating terror of the day the truth would finally come out. He hid the financial ruin to keep up appearances, and now the entire Atlanta elite knows they are living on borrowed time and borrowed money. But the crushing mortgages were not enough to stop the bleeding. Ezekiel turns his sharp, unforgiving gaze toward Chloe. Chloe instinctively shrinks behind Brad, trying to escape the burning glare of the room. Ezekiel's voice fills the ballroom, merciless and precise. He details exactly how Desmond desperately siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from the family trust to pay for Chloe's lavish magazine cover wedding. Every single exotic flower arrangement, every imported vintage champagne bottle, and every custom monogrammed silk napkin was paid for with stolen money. Chloe's perfect, untouchable influencer image is instantly annihilated in front of the exact people she relies on for social capital. The women who previously envied her lifestyle now look at her with naked pity and extreme disgust. The wedding was a massive drain, Ezekiel explains, opening the top ledger and pointing to a highlighted column, but it was a one-time expense. The real parasite was the recurring monthly wire transfers. Ezekiel explains to the silent crowd that Desmond had been authorizing enormous payouts under the guise of corporate consulting fees. These fees were supposedly going to a cutting-edge digital asset firm to modernize the Adams real estate portfolio and prepare the company for the next century of business. Desmond had signed off on the invoices, claiming the expenditures were absolutely vital for the survival of the family brand. Ezekiel closes the ledger with a sharp, decisive snap. The money never went to a legitimate tech firm. It went directly into a series of empty shell companies owned and operated by Brad. Brad had been bleeding his father-in-law dry, extracting exorbitant fees for absolutely nothing, while living rent-free in the Buckhead mansion and wearing expensive tailored suits paid for by my grandfather's hard work. Brad was not a tech visionary or a startup genius. He was a common grifter who found an easy mark in a desperate failing man. The tension reaches an absolute peak. The room is dead silent except for Valerie's ragged, breathless sobbing. Arthur Sterling, the SEC investigator, crosses his arms and smiles a slow, knowing smile as he watches Brad physically tremble. Brad realizes that his entire scam has not only been exposed to his humiliated family, but to the federal government. He looks desperately toward the heavy mahogany doors, frantically calculating his chances of simply running away into the night and disappearing before the marshals arrive on Monday morning. Grandpa Ezekiel leans forward in his leather armchair. He ignores Desmond's pathetic silence. He ignores Valerie's quiet weeping. He turns his piercing, uncompromising gaze entirely onto Brad. The room holds its collective breath, waiting for the final blow. And you, boy, Grandpa Ezekiel, booms the absolute authority of a self-made billionaire radiating from every single syllable. You thought you could marry into black wealth to save your sinking, bankrupt family name. The silence following my grandfather's booming question is absolute and suffocating. All eyes instantly shift from the towering digital projection of the property deeds down to Brad. I watch him unravel in real time. The breakdown is visceral, a complete and total physical collapse of his carefully cultivated persona. It is as if I am watching him through a tight, rapidly orbiting camera lens, catching every microscopic twitch of his disintegrating composure. The heavy ambient lighting of the ballroom beats down on him, illuminating the thick, greasy beads of sweat congregating along his receding hairline. His pale blue eyes, usually so smug and lazily arrogant, dart frantically around the room. He looks at the federal judges who are staring at him with cold disdain. He looks at Arthur Sterling, the SEC investigator, who is watching him with the clinical interest of a predator tracking wounded prey. He looks at the venture capitalists who politely rejected his cheap business cards just an hour ago. Brad opens his mouth to speak, to offer one of his slick, practiced rebuttals, but only a pathetic, wet stutter escapes his lips. He aggressively adjusts his perfectly tailored silk tie, pulling at his collar, as if the imported fabric is physically choking him. The crushing weight of the room's collective judgment becomes too much to bear. Something inside his meticulously engineered psyche violently shatters. The polite, cultured mask of the progressive, forward-thinking Southern gentleman completely melts away, revealing the bitter, entitled, rotting core beneath. Brad's face twists into an ugly, sneering snarl. He takes an aggressive step toward Grandpa Ezekiel, his hands curled into tight, shaking fists. He snaps. He screams that we should all be on our hands and knees thanking him. He spits out that his family arrived on the Mayflower, that his bloodline is woven into the very foundation of American history. He yells that he lowered himself, that he compromised his aristocratic pedigree to associate with our family. He claims he elevated the Adams name simply by standing in our home and legally attaching himself to our lineage. The racist, elitist venom practically drips from his teeth as he paces the marble floor. He tells my grandfather that without a man like him legitimizing our portfolio in the traditional banking sector, we are nothing but lucky upstarts playing a sophisticated game we do not truly understand. He screams that he is the only reason anyone in traditional high society ever took Desmond seriously. A collective shockwave of pure, unfiltered disgust rolls through the grand ballroom. The HBCU presidents shake their heads in silent, absolute contempt. The real estate tycoons look at him with a cold, calculating fury that promises he will never work in this state again. Arthur Sterling casually pulls a small leather-bound notepad from his breast pocket and begins writing, silently documenting the erratic, highly incriminating outburst for his Monday morning federal subpoena. Brad does not care. He is completely untethered, riding a dangerous wave of manic, self-righteous delusion. A few feet away, Chloe stands completely frozen. Her heavy diamond earrings catch the light as she begins to physically shake. The horrific, undeniable truth finally pieces itself together in her mind, shattering her curated reality. Brad does not love her. He never loved her. She was never his equal, never his beloved partner, and certainly never his muse. She was a convenient, gullible walking ATM. She was a temporary, desperate life raft, designed to save his bankrupt, decaying family from sinking into total obscurity. The fairy tale romance she shoved down the throat of every bridal magazine and social media follower was a complete, humiliating lie. Chloe lets out a piercing, guttural wail. Tears stream down her face, ruining her perfect camera-ready makeup, leaving dark, jagged trails of expensive mascara down her cheeks. But Chloe's mind is a fortress of impenetrable narcissism. Even now, standing in the smoking ruins of her fake marriage while her husband degrades her heritage, she is entirely incapable of holding Brad accountable or admitting her own catastrophic stupidity. Her twisted logic requires a scapegoat. She whips around, her tear-filled eyes locking directly onto me. She points a shaking, manicured finger at my face. She screams that this is entirely my fault. She hysterically cries that I am a jealous, bitter monster who could not stand to see her happy. She yells that I destroyed her life, that if I had just kept my mouth shut, if I had just stayed in the background where I belonged, none of this would be happening. She genuinely believes that the exposure of the fraud is somehow worse than the fraud itself. She tells the stunned room that I manipulated our grandfather, that I orchestrated this entire evening just to ruin her perfect image. She is completely blind to the fact that her husband just openly degraded our entire family in front of the city's most powerful elite. Desmond, realizing that Brad's unhinged racist rant and Chloe's shrieking are completely sealing his permanent banishment from Atlanta, high society finally finds his voice. Terrified of any further exposure, he lunges forward, grabbing Brad violently by the shoulder of his expensive suit. He shakes Brad, his eyes wide with absolute panic. He orders Brad to shut his mouth immediately. He tells him to get out of the house, trying desperately to play the role of the outraged protective patriarch. He attempts to salvage one tiny pathetic shred of dignity by pretending he is fiercely defending the family honor against a deceitful son-in-law. Brad violently shoves Desmond's hands off his shoulders. He lets out a loud barking laugh that echoes maniacally off the crystal chandeliers. He looks at Desmond with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. He tells Desmond to drop the righteous act. Brad steps right up to the microphone stand, grabbing the heavy metal base with both hands. He leans in and announces to the dead silent room that Desmond is in no position to throw anyone out. Brad points directly at Desmond's chest and loudly reveals that for the last 2 years, Desmond has been literally begging him on his hands and knees to secure highly illegal, unregulated offshore loans to hide his massive, catastrophic debts from Grandpa Ezekiel. The sheer magnitude of Brad's confession detonates like a bomb in the center of the grand ballroom. The revelation of highly illegal offshore loans transforms this from a scandalous family dispute into a massive federal crime. The venture capitalists physically step backward, putting immediate distance between themselves and Desmond. The federal judges turn away completely, severing any perceived association with a man headed for a federal indictment. Desmond staggers backward, as if he has been physically struck. He grasps the edge of a catering table, sending a silver tray of crystal glasses crashing to the marble floor. The shattering glass rings out sharply, but it is barely heard over the frantic, buzzing murmurs of Atlanta's elite, completely reevaluating the fraudulent Adams empire. Seeing her entire carefully constructed universe evaporating before her very eyes, Valerie finally snaps. The suffocating reality of her lost social standing, her ruined country club memberships, and her impending financial destitution shatters her refined facade. She lets out a piercing theatrical wail that cuts through the murmurs of the crowd. She throws her hands into the air and collapses onto her knees right in the middle of the foyer. The heavy silk of her designer gown pools around her on the cold marble. She covers her face and begins to weep hysterically, playing the role of the tragic martyred matriarch with desperate enthusiasm. She screams that this is all a terrible misunderstanding. She looks up at the towering figures of the HBCU presidents and the real estate tycoons begging for their sympathy. She cries that nobody understands the crushing, suffocating pressure of maintaining their position in society. She yells that the world is constantly waiting for powerful Black families to fail, and that she was only doing what was necessary to protect their image. She beats her chest, claiming every hidden debt, every stolen dollar, and every fraudulent mortgage was a noble sacrifice. She cries that she was shielding the family from the vicious judgment of a society that wants to see them fall from grace. She weaves a masterful, manipulative narrative painting herself as the selfless protector of the Adams legacy who was forced into desperate measures by an unforgiving world. I do not feel a single ounce of pity. I watch my mother sobbing on the floor, performing for an audience that is no longer buying her tickets. I smooth the fabric of my emerald gown and slowly descend the steps of the dais. The heavy silence parts for me as I walk across the room. The guests watch with bated breath as I stop directly in front of Valerie. I look down at the woman who spent 35 years making me feel completely invisible. I do not raise my voice. I do not yell. I speak with a freezing, absolute clarity that forces everyone in the room to lean in and listen. You didn't protect the family, Mom. I state, my voice cutting through her hysterical weeping like a blade of ice. You sold it. You sold every single value this family ever stood for, just to buy another season of fake friends. Valerie gasps, reaching a trembling hand out toward the hem of my dress. I take a deliberate step back, refusing to let her touch me. You want to talk about sacrifice? I continue, my gaze locking onto her terrified eyes. Let us talk about what you were willing to sacrifice for your precious social standing. You left me bleeding in a hospital bed because holding up a facade in a VIP suite was more important than your daughter's life. The ballroom goes completely deathly quiet. Even Brad stops his frantic pacing. The horrifying truth of my words settles over the crowd like a heavy winter chill. I force Valerie to remember the night I was involved in a severe car accident 3 years ago. I force her to remember how the emergency room nurses called her phone 7 times begging her to come to the hospital while I was being prepped for emergency surgery. I remind her in front of all her high society peers that she refused to leave a charity gala because she was seated at the sponsor table next to the governor. She had told the trauma nurse that I was just being dramatic and that she would visit in the morning after the photographer took the official event photos. She chose a photo opportunity over her critically injured child. The women in the crowd who previously envied Valerie's immaculate style now stare at her with naked, unfiltered revulsion. A mother abandoning her bleeding child for a VIP lanyard is a sin that no amount of offshore money can ever wash away. Valerie opens her mouth to deny it, to spin another lie, but the truth is written entirely across her horrified, guilty face. She shrinks down, wrapping her arms around herself, realizing that I have just permanently destroyed the only thing she ever truly cared about. Her reputation is dead. She will never be invited to another gala. She will never sit on another board. She is entirely socially radioactive. Desmond tries to rush to his wife's side, attempting to play the role of the supportive husband, but his legs give out. He slumps against the marble pillar, a completely broken, defeated shell of a man. Chloe is still sobbing uncontrollably, completely paralyzed by the destruction of her fake marriage and the exposure of her stolen lifestyle. Brad is frantically swiping at his phone, desperately trying to secure a flight out of the country before the SEC freezes his accounts. They are a pathetic, shattered portrait of greed and vanity. Then the heavy, authoritative sound of a silver-tipped cane striking the marble floor echoes through the room once more. Grandpa Ezekiel steps forward, his jaw set in a line of absolute, unforgiving fury. He does not look at Desmond or Valerie with sadness. He looks at them as a surgeon looks at a diseased limb that must be amputated to save the rest of the body. The crowd instinctively takes another collective step back, recognizing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Ezekiel slowly raises his weathered hand into the air. The gesture commands instant, absolute silence. The remaining murmurs die instantly. Even Chloe stifles her loud sobbing, terrified of drawing her grandfather's wrath. Ezekiel lowers his hand and grips the handle of his cane. He stares down at the pathetic ruins of his son's family. He announces that the deception, the theft, and the profound disrespect to the Adams name ends tonight. He takes a deep breath, his chest expanding as he prepares to deliver the final devastating blow. He looks directly at Desmond and announces the ultimate irreversible consequence for their betrayal. The heavy silence in the ballroom is instantly shattered by the sharp, authoritative snap of Grandpa Ezekiel's fingers. From the shadowed alcove near the grand staircase, a tall, imposing man steps directly into the harsh lighting. He is not a party guest mingling for cheap champagne. He is wearing an immaculate charcoal suit and carrying a thick stack of heavy-bound manila folders. I recognize him immediately, and so does half the room. This is Marcus Sterling, the most ruthless, highly feared estate attorney in the entire state of Georgia. He glides across the polished marble floor with the quiet, predatory grace of a shark circling bleeding prey. Ezekiel's voice cuts through the tension like the crack of a whip. He announces to the breathless crowd that effective as of 9 o'clock this morning, he has legally and officially dissolved the original Adams Family Trust. Desmond lets out a sound that is half desperate gasp and half choking sob. He lunges forward, his hands shaking wildly, but Marcus Sterling smoothly intercepts his path. The attorney pulls 3 heavy folders from his stack and shoves them directly into the chests of Desmond, Valerie, and Chloe. He does not offer a polite, comforting smile. He simply instructs them in a monotone voice to turn to page 42 of the master document. Desmond scrambles to open the folder, tearing at the thick parchment paper in his absolute haste. Valerie snatches her copy, her manicured nails digging deep into the heavy leather binding as she frantically scans the dense legal jargon. Chloe stares blindly at the text, her tear-streaked face hovering over pages of complex financial structuring that she completely lacks the intellectual capacity to understand. She is looking for a dollar amount, but finding nothing but impenetrable corporate clauses. Grandpa Ezekiel does not wait for them to decipher the legalese. He decides to translate it for them with brutal crystal clarity. He states that the previous trust, the exact trust Desmond had been eagerly waiting to inherit for over 30 years, is entirely permanently dead. The Addams family fortune has been completely restructured and legally fortified beyond their reach. Ezekiel points a trembling but furious finger directly at his son. He announces that the new legal structure leaves exactly $0 to Desmond. He shifts his piercing gaze to Valerie, stating that her allocation is completely non-existent and her access to all corporate credit lines has already been terminated. He finally looks at Chloe with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disdain, confirming that her lavish monthly allowance, her protected trust fund, and her future inheritance have been permanently revoked. They are cut off, completely legally and irreversibly severed from the generational wealth they took for granted. Desmond's face turns a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. He throws the heavy folder onto the marble floor, where it slides to a halt at Marcus Sterling's expensive leather shoes. Desmond screams that this is completely illegal. He yells that he is the only rightful heir, that he is the direct bloodline, and that no judge in the entire country will ever uphold a sudden last-minute change to a billionaire's estate. He aggressively threatens to drag his own father through the court system for the next 20 years, claiming elder abuse and severe mental incapacitation. Marcus Sterling does not flinch. He calmly retrieves a secondary authenticated document from his breast pocket and holds it up high for the entire room to see. The attorney speaks with a freezing clinical authority that instantly drains the remaining angry color from Desmond's face. Marcus explains that in careful preparation for this exact moment, Grandpa Ezekiel underwent independent, comprehensive psychological and cognitive evaluations by 3 separate board-certified neurologists. The signed medical affidavits declare him to be in absolute perfect mental health. Furthermore, Marcus details how the forensic audit of Desmond's rampant embezzlement serves as irrefutable legal justification for the extreme disinheritance. Marcus looks Desmond dead in the eye and promises that any attempt to contest the new will would not only be immediately thrown out of court, but would instantly trigger criminal wire fraud charges against both Desmond and Brad. They are completely trapped. There is no legal loophole to exploit, no lengthy courtroom battle to wage, and absolutely no public sympathy left to leverage. The steel cage has been shut and padlocked. Valerie falls back onto her knees, her eyes vacant and unblinking. The horrifying realization that she is officially broke, that her platinum cards will be declined by morning, and that her entire social identity has been vaporized, sends her into a state of total catatonic shock. Chloe drops her folder, covering her mouth to muffle a high-pitched, hysterical scream. She looks at the powerful venture capitalists and the state senators, silently begging for someone, anyone, to intervene, but the elite guests simply avert their eyes, completely washing their hands of the ruined family. Grandpa Ezekiel lets the devastating reality sink deep into their bones. He watches his son hyperventilate, his daughter-in-law stare blankly at the floor, and his granddaughter weep for her lost luxury. Then he commands the room's attention one final time. He taps his silver cane twice, demanding absolute silence for the culmination of his master plan. The old trust is dead. Ezekiel's voice rings out rich and incredibly powerful. Every single asset I have spent 50 years building: the international shipping logistics empire, the massive commercial real estate portfolio, the offshore liquid capital, and the highly profitable corporate holding companies, has been transferred into a brand new, impenetrable, irrevocable trust. Desmond looks up, his eyes bloodshot and wide with sheer, unfiltered panic. He asks the only question that matters. He asks who controls the money. He desperately wants to know who has been handed the keys to the kingdom, praying that perhaps Ezekiel has placed it in the hands of a neutral third-party management firm. Ezekiel slowly turns his body, facing completely away from the smoking wreckage of his son's family. He looks directly at me, standing poised, confident, and entirely unbothered on the raised dais. A rare, genuine smile breaks across his weathered face. It is a look of pure, unadulterated pride. He points his silver-tipped cane straight at my chest. He announces to the breathless room of Atlanta's most powerful figures that the new multi-billion-dollar irrevocable trust requires a singular visionary leader. He declares that the Adams legacy will never be managed by a cowardly thief, a vain socialite, or a parasitic fraud. Grandpa Ezekiel officially introduces the sole executor, the majority shareholder, and the newly appointed chief executive officer of the entire Adams corporate empire. He introduces me. The ballroom erupts into absolute pandemonium. The sheer shock of the announcement acts like a match dropped into a powder keg. The refined, elegant atmosphere of the gala completely disintegrates. The elite guests, the judges, the politicians, and the venture capitalists abandon all pretenses of polite society. They whisper frantically, pulling out their phones to text their brokers and partners about the massive seismic shift in the Atlanta real estate hierarchy. I stand perfectly still on the raised dais, looking down at the sea of shocked faces. For my entire life, I was the invisible daughter, the quiet disappointment who preferred spreadsheets and blueprints over country club luncheons and designer handbags. Now I am the undeniable, undisputed center of their universe. Desmond completely loses his mind. The reality that his overlooked scapegoat daughter now holds the leash to his financial survival drives him into a blind, feral rage. He charges toward the marble steps of the dais, his face contorted with pure hatred. He points a trembling, aggressive finger directly at my face. He screams that this is a magnificent, coordinated scam. He yells that I am a manipulative, calculating snake who brainwashed a vulnerable old man. He spits out that I will never see a single dime of that money because he is going to sue me into absolute oblivion. He promises to hire the most vicious, expensive litigators in the country to drag me through probate court for the next 3 decades. He swears he will prove undue influence and strip me of everything. Marcus Sterling steps smoothly between Desmond and the stairs, blocking his path with an imposing, immovable presence. The attorney does not raise his voice, but his tone carries a freezing, lethal authority that silences Desmond's screaming instantly. Marcus calmly opens a red leather folder and pulls out a single heavily redacted document. He holds it up for Desmond to see. Marcus informs my father that Grandpa Ezekiel anticipated this exact temper tantrum. Marcus explains that the new irrevocable trust contains a highly specific poison pill clause designed exclusively for Desmond. If Desmond files a single legal motion contesting my appointment, if he hires a single lawyer to challenge the estate, or if he even attempts to publicly defame my leadership, the poison pill activates automatically. Marcus taps the document and reveals that it is a pre-drafted criminal referral to the United States Department of Justice. It contains every single forensic accounting record proving Desmond committed bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated tax evasion. Marcus looks Desmond dead in the eye and calmly informs him that any attempt to sue me will guarantee him a minimum 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Desmond physically deflates. The fight completely drains out of him. His shoulders slump, his chest caves in, and he stumbles backward, as if the air has been violently knocked from his lungs. He realizes with absolute crushing certainty that he is totally powerless. He is entirely at my mercy. Seeing her father completely broken sends Chloe into a state of sheer mindless panic. She looks around frantically searching for Brad, but her so-called visionary husband is already inching toward the heavy mahogany doors, abandoning her to face the wreckage alone. Chloe realizes that her safety net is gone. Her credit cards are useless. Her fairy tale life is a hollow smoking crater. She scrambles toward the dais, her expensive silk gown bunching up around her knees. She throws herself onto the marble steps, literally dropping to her knees right at my feet. She reaches out and desperately grabs my hand, her fingers digging into my skin. Tears stream down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. She looks up at me with wild, pleading eyes, completely abandoning her lifelong superiority complex. She cries that we are sisters, that blood is thicker than anything else. She frantically promises to file for divorce from Brad first thing Monday morning, claiming he manipulated her and that she never truly loved him. She begs me not to cut her off. She pleads for a position in the new corporate structure. She asks for a vice president title, a consulting role, or even just a modest monthly stipend. She promises to do whatever I say, to follow my orders, and to support my vision for the company. I look down at the beautiful golden child who spent her entire life making sure I felt small, ugly, and unwanted. I do not feel anger anymore. I only feel a profound clinical detachment. I slowly, firmly pull my hand out of her desperate grasp. I remind her of the countless times she humiliated me. I remind her of the dinners where she laughed at my ambitions, and the family gatherings where she told everyone I was an embarrassment. You called me a nuisance and a burden. I say, my voice echoing clearly across the silent ballroom. You told me I dragged down the family brand. I look at her ruined, tear-stained face and deliver the final verdict. The company does not hire liabilities. Chloe lets out a devastated, wailing sob and collapses against the marble steps, burying her face in her hands. I step around her and begin to walk down the remaining stairs, intending to leave the suffocating toxicity of my former family behind forever. But Valerie intercepts me. Seeing her husband destroyed and her favored daughter discarded, Valerie shifts her strategy with terrifying speed. The aggressive, aristocratic matriarch vanishes instantly, replaced by a wounded, desperately fragile mother. She steps into my path, blocking my exit. Her eyes are brimming with fresh, perfectly timed tears. She reaches out and gently touches my arm, her voice trembling with manufactured maternal affection. She tells me that I have made my point and that she acknowledges my victory. She admits that I am incredibly smart and that I outplayed them all. But then she deploys her ultimate desperate manipulation. She looks deeply into my eyes and softly claims that despite all our disagreements, I am still a good Christian woman with a pure heart. She tells me that I cannot possibly throw my own parents out into the cold, unforgiving street. She references the massive, sprawling Buckhead mansion they live in, pleading that it is their only remaining sanctuary. She begs me to let them keep their home, playing on the last frayed strings of my daughterly guilt. The camera locks into a smooth, slow push and entirely focused on my face. The chaotic background noise of the ballroom, the frantic whispering, the gasps of the elite guests, and Chloe's ragged sobbing all fades into a dull, distant roar. The framing is incredibly tight, capturing the supreme ice-cold satisfaction radiating from my eyes. I do not blink. I do not offer a warm, reassuring smile. I look at Valerie not as a daughter seeking maternal approval, but as an absolute apex predator who has just cornered her lifelong tormentor. I reach a steady, calm hand into my emerald clutch. My fingers brush against the smooth edge of a single folded document. I pull the heavy parchment paper out and hold it lightly between my fingers. About the Buckhead mansion. Mom, I say, my voice perfectly measured and devoid of any familial warmth. When Dad defaulted on the third mortgage last month, the bank quietly put it up for auction. Valerie stops breathing. The perfectly timed tears completely dry up in her eyes, leaving a hollow, terrified stare. Desmond lets out a choked sound from the bottom of the stairs, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. He had desperately convinced himself that he could somehow manage the predatory loans, that he could keep the impending foreclosure a secret from the high society circles they worshipped. He never imagined the bank would move so fast, and he certainly never imagined who would be watching. The illusion of their untouchable wealth is instantly violently shattered. I take one deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. I extend my hand and press the crisp legal document directly against Valerie's chest, forcing her trembling hands to take it. I bought it, I state flatly, watching the absolute devastation ripple across her features. In cash. Through my LLC. I am your landlord now. The words strike her with the physical force of a sledgehammer. Valerie physically recoils, clutching the property deed as if it is burning her skin. She stares down at the transfer of ownership, reading my name legally stamped across the very estate she used to parade her false superiority. The massive, sprawling mansion, with its imported Italian marble, the manicured gardens, the towering columns, and the sweeping grand staircase, no longer belongs to her. It belongs to the daughter she mocked, sidelined, and discarded. Every dinner party she hosted, every gala she planned in that house was entirely funded by deceit, and now the true owner is standing right in front of her. Desmond stumbles forward, grabbing the document from his wife's hands. His eyes scan the legal text, his lips moving silently as he reads the indisputable proof of his total financial annihilation. He realizes that I did not just inherit the Adams corporate empire. I actively, systematically purchased the very roof over his head. The ultimate symbol of his fabricated aristocratic success is now completely legally owned by the child he deemed unworthy of the family legacy. He is a king without a castle, standing completely exposed before the very people he spent his entire life trying to impress. Valerie's mouth opens and closes soundlessly. The realization that she is standing in front of her country club peers completely destitute and at the mercy of the daughter she abused strips away her final remaining shred of dignity. She looks at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, searching desperation, hoping to find a hint of mercy, a trace of the obedient, people-pleasing girl I used to be. She finds absolutely nothing. "Nia, please." Valerie chokes out, her voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "You cannot do this. We are your family. Where will we go? What will we do?" I look down at the woman who told me I was a failure because I preferred spreadsheets to socialite luncheons. I look at the father who sat silently while my sister degraded my existence. I look at the family that prioritized a fraudulent VIP lifestyle over my literal survival. I look at the people who demanded absolute loyalty while offering nothing but conditional toxic manipulation in return. I do not raise my voice, but the absolute finality in my tone sends a shiver through everyone standing within earshot. "I am not evicting you tonight," I announce, turning slightly so the entire room can witness the final judgment. I reach back into my clutch and pull out a standard legal envelope. I hand it directly to Desmond, who takes it with shaking, numb fingers. "That is a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises," I declare, projecting my voice across the silent ballroom. "I am turning the property into a design academy for underprivileged Black girls. You have exactly 30 days to pack." The absolute brilliance of the move sends a shockwave through the elite crowd. Arthur Sterling, the SEC investigator, actually lets out a low, impressed whistle. The HBCU presidents exchange looks of profound, undeniable respect. I am not just taking their house. I am transforming their monument to selfish elitism into a beacon of community empowerment. I am taking the very space they used to exclude others and turning it into a fortress of opportunity for young women who look exactly like the daughter they threw away. The poetic justice is surgically precise and entirely ruthless. Valerie lets out a sharp, breathless gasp, collapsing fully against Desmond, who can barely keep himself upright. Chloe covers her ears, refusing to process the reality that she will be forced to pack her designer bags and leave the only luxury she has ever known. Brad is already gone, having slipped out the side doors like the cowardly grifter he is, leaving his fake aristocratic family to face their ruin entirely alone. Grandpa Ezekiel steps up beside me, resting his heavy hands on the silver handle of his cane. He does not offer his son a single glance of pity. He looks at the room of powerful investors, judges, and politicians, and nods once, confirming that the transition of power is absolute and irreversible. I turn my back on the weeping remnants of my former family. I do not feel a shred of guilt. I do not feel the agonizing, desperate need for their approval that plagued my entire childhood. I look out at the room as the newly appointed CEO, the majority shareholder, and the sole architect of my own destiny. The heavy, suffocating chains of the Addams family expectations have been completely shattered. I step up to the microphone, the bright stage lights illuminating the flawless emerald silk of my gown, and I prepare to build my new empire. Valerie's mouth opens, but absolutely no sound comes out. Her perfectly manicured hands drop limply to her sides. She slowly turns her head, taking in the sea of faces surrounding the raised dais. The elite crowd, the politicians, the venture capitalists, and the country club wives she spent her entire life desperately trying to impress are all watching her. There is no sympathy in their eyes. There is only cold, clinical judgment. The high society world is utterly merciless to those who fall from grace, and Valerie has just plummeted from the absolute pinnacle. Her breathing turns ragged. She starts to hyperventilate, her chest heaving as she clutches frantically at her pearl necklace. The public social execution she feared more than death itself has just occurred in real time under the bright chandeliers of the grand ballroom. Chloe is still crumpled on the marble steps, weeping hysterically into her hands. She reaches a desperate, trembling hand out toward Brad. She begs her husband to help her to do something to fix this unimaginable nightmare. Brad stands completely rigid. His eyes dart from the eviction notice trembling in Desmond's hand to the furious, unyielding expression on my face. The mental math happens instantly behind his calculating eyes. The generational trust fund is dead. The lavish monthly allowance is permanently gone. The sprawling estate belongs to me. Chloe is completely and utterly broke. Brad does not offer a comforting hand. He does not offer a single word of reassurance. He simply turns on his heel. He pushes roughly past a stunned state senator and storms aggressively out of the ballroom, abandoning his sobbing wife on the floor. Chloe screams his name, her voice cracking with raw agony, but the heavy mahogany doors simply swing shut behind his retreating figure. She realizes in that crushing moment that she was only ever loved for the bank account she no longer possesses. Desmond watches his chosen son-in-law abandon his favorite daughter. He watches his wife gasping for air in the center of the room. He looks down at his own shaking hands, holding the legally binding eviction notice. The arrogant, entitled patriarch who ruled our family with an iron fist is entirely gone. He seems to age 20 years in 20 minutes. His posture crumbles, his broad shoulders caving inward as if an invisible crushing weight has been dropped directly onto his spine. He looks like a hollow, empty shell of a man. The realization that he has lost his company, his fortune, his home, and his legacy absolutely breaks his spirit. He has nothing left to leverage, no one left to manipulate, and no power left to intimidate. I do not wait for them to compose themselves. I raise my right hand and give a brief, subtle nod to the back of the room. Instantly, 6 highly trained security personnel step forward from the shadows. I hired them specifically for this exact moment. They are wearing immaculate dark suits and moving with quiet, absolute efficiency. They flank my parents and my sister, forming a tight, impenetrable wall of muscle around them. The head of security speaks in a low, polite, but entirely uncompromising voice, instructing them that it is time to leave the premises immediately. Desmond tries to muster a final spark of outrage, opening his mouth to issue a threat, but a security guard smoothly and firmly grips his elbow, guiding him forcefully toward the exit. Valerie is practically carried out by 2 guards, her face hidden behind her trembling hands, as she sobs uncontrollably, unable to meet the gaze of her former peers. Chloe stumbles blindly after them, her expensive designer heels echoing pitifully across the polished marble floor. It is the ultimate walk of shame. The toxic parasites who drained this family for decades are finally being excised. As the heavy doors close behind my ruined family, a profound, heavy silence settles over the ballroom. The absolute brutality of the corporate takeover is complete. I stand on the dais surveying the most powerful people in Atlanta. They have just witnessed the total annihilation of Desmond Adams and his entire household. They understand exactly what kind of leader I am going to be. Slowly and deliberately, Arthur Sterling raises his crystal champagne glass in my direction. Across the room, the venture capitalists, the board members, and the elite real estate developers follow his lead. Hundreds of glasses are raised in silent, unanimous respect. There are no murmurs of pity for my parents. In this ruthless world, power and competence are the only currencies that matter, and I have just claimed all of it. The tension in the room finally begins to dissipate as the orchestra smoothly transitions into a lively, upbeat jazz piece. The guests resume their mingling, shifting their conversations from my father's spectacular downfall to my upcoming corporate strategies. I step down from the dais, the heavy adrenaline slowly draining from my veins, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. Grandpa Ezekiel meets me at the bottom of the stairs. He dismisses Marcus Sterling with a quick wave of his hand, leaving just the two of us standing in a quiet corner of the massive ballroom. He leans heavily on his silver cane, his weathered face lined with deep exhaustion, but radiating absolute peace. He looks at me with a pride so fierce and genuine, it almost takes my breath away. He tells me that I did exactly what had to be done. He says he can finally rest, knowing the Adams legacy is safe, impenetrable, and in the hands of the only person truly worthy of building it further. Before I can respond, the side doors of the ballroom burst open. Two tiny tornadoes of energy rush into the elegant space, completely oblivious to the ruthless corporate coup that just occurred. My 7-year-old twins, Maya and Leo, sprint across the polished marble floor, their formal clothes slightly rumpled from playing in the childcare suite upstairs. They bypass me entirely and throw themselves directly at Grandpa Ezekiel, wrapping their small arms tightly around his waist. Ezekiel lets out a deep, booming laugh, dropping his stern, intimidating facade instantly as he hugs his great-grandchildren. I watch them together, feeling an overwhelming wave of vindication wash over me. The toxic generational cycle is permanently broken. My children will never know the conditional love, the cruel manipulation, or the constant belittling that defined my entire childhood. They will only know the unbreakable empire I have secured for them and the absolute certainty that they are loved exactly as they are. The camera floats backward, pulling away from me as I stand on the sprawling stone balcony of my own estate. The morning air is crisp, and the movement feels entirely smooth, liberating, and triumphant. 3 months have passed since the gala, and the dust has finally settled over the smoking ruins of the old Adams family. I take a slow sip of my coffee, watching the sun rise over the manicured grounds of my property. I watch the news updates on my tablet with a quiet, steady satisfaction. Brad thought he could outrun his crimes by abandoning Chloe, but the Department of Justice moves much faster than a cowardly grifter. He is currently sitting under a massive federal indictment. The forensic audit Marcus Sterling executed was absolute perfection. The FBI raided Brad's sleek downtown offices just weeks after the gala, seizing every hard drive and freezing every hidden offshore account he desperately tried to drain. He is facing multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated embezzlement. He spent his entire adult life stealing from others to build his counterfeit genius persona, and now he is staring down the barrel of a decade in federal prison. There are no high-priced fixers left to bail him out, and his carefully curated network of investors completely vanished the second the subpoenas were issued. Chloe finally got the independence she never wanted. Without my money to fund her delusions, and without Brad to shield her from reality, she hit rock bottom with blinding speed. She now lives in a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. The walls are paper-thin, the plumbing rattles every time she turns on the faucet, and the luxury she once considered a basic human right is entirely gone. She works retail at a mid-tier department store, folding sweaters and ringing up purchases for the exact same high-society women she used to viciously mock at country club luncheons. Her feet blister after 8-hour shifts. The women do not look her in the eye when she hands them their shopping bags. She spends her meager breaks scrolling through social media, looking at the ghost of a life she threw away, simply because she could not treat her own sister with basic human decency. She is finally standing on her own 2 feet, and the reality of it is crushing her. My parents are enduring a fate they consider far worse than death. They are irrelevant. Desmond and Valerie are renting a modest, heavily outdated flat in a neighborhood they previously would not have even driven through. They have been completely and entirely ostracized from Atlanta's elite society. The country club revoked their membership the very morning after the gala, citing a sudden failure to meet financial obligations. The charity boards immediately removed Valerie's name from their letterheads, replacing her with younger, wealthier socialites. The politicians and venture capitalists who used to drink Desmond's expensive scotch now send his calls directly to voicemail. Desmond spends his days staring at peeling wallpaper, while Valerie desperately tries to mend clothes she used to throw away. They wake up every single day to the deafening silence of a world that has completely forgotten they exist. They realize now that nobody ever loved them. People only loved the wealth they hoarded, and the moment that wealth vanished, they became entirely invisible. I turn away from the balcony railing as the camera transitions to a steady tracking shot following me as I walk back inside. The air in the room is warm and alive. I step through the sunlit corridors until I reach the grand foyer of the newly renovated Buckhead mansion. The heavy, oppressive energy my parents infused into these walls has been completely eradicated. It is no longer a monument to exclusion and elitist vanity. It is a thriving, bustling design academy for underprivileged Black girls. The grand dining room where my mother used to host her toxic dinner parties is now a state-of-the-art drafting studio. Young, brilliant minds lean over massive oak tables, sketching blueprints and learning the fundamentals of commercial architecture, coding, and real estate acquisition. The walls are lined with their creations. They are learning how to build their own empires, how to secure their own financial freedom, and how to navigate a world that often tries to make them feel small. I walk through the aisles offering guidance and encouragement, giving them the exact tools and validation my family tried to withhold from me. I walk out into the expansive central courtyard. The manicured hedges and sterile fountains have been replaced by vibrant community spaces. I watch Maya and Leo running happily across the green lawn, chasing a golden retriever puppy we adopted last month. Their laughter echoes against the brick walls, bright and entirely unburdened. They are safe. They are secure. They are thriving under the protective shadow of the new Adams legacy. Grandpa Ezekiel sits on a teak bench nearby, watching the twins with a soft, contented smile. He caught a glimpse of the true future and realized it was brighter than anything he could have built alone. I stop in the center of the courtyard, feeling the solid earth beneath my feet. I turn and look directly into the camera lens. The final pieces of the chessboard have fallen exactly where I placed them. The years of biting my tongue, of shrinking myself to make them comfortable, of enduring their casual cruelty, are officially over. I took their strongest weapons and forged them into my own impenetrable armor. They thought cutting me down would make them taller. They thought abandoning me would make me weak. But when they left me in the dark, they forgot one thing. I was the one paying the light bill. I do not just wear the crown now, I own the gold it is made of. My lips curve into a slow, triumphant smile as the bright Georgia sun catches the edge of my profile. The camera slowly fades to absolute black.